My parents sat me at the kids' table at a fancy family dinner, so I left and never came back. You know that moment when you realize your family sees you as less than? I'm talking about that crushing instant when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally show you exactly where you rank in their world. My moment came at a fancy family dinner when I was 27 years old, sitting at a plastic kids' table decorated with cartoon characters, while my younger sister held court at the adults' table like royalty. What happened next wasn't just about a seating arrangement. It was about years of being invisible, years of pretending everything was fine, and one final decision that changed my family forever. But before I tell you how I walked out and never looked back, you need to understand the twisted dynamic that led to that moment. Because trust me, this wasn't just about where I sat for dinner. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand just how deep this goes. My name is Marcus, and I've spent my entire life being the forgotten middle child in a family that worshipped at the altar of my younger sister, Vanessa. From the time we were kids, the difference in how we were treated was so obvious that even neighbors would comment on it, though never directly to my parents, of course. Vanessa got horseback riding lessons, piano lessons, dance classes, and a brand new car for her 16th birthday, while I got a used bicycle from a garage sale and a pat on the head. Every achievement I had was met with a quiet, "That's nice," while Vanessa's report card would go up on the fridge even if she got straight C's, celebrated like she'd just won a Nobel Prize. I learned early on that complaining about it only made me the problem child, the jealous one, the ungrateful son who couldn't be happy for his sister's success. The pattern continued into adulthood in ways that were somehow even more painful because I thought things would change once we grew up. I graduated college with honors, and my parents came to the ceremony but left early to help Vanessa move into her new apartment, her third apartment that year because she kept changing her mind about which neighborhood had the best vibe. I got my first real job as a software engineer at a respected company, and when I called to tell my mom, she spent 5 minutes on the phone with me before saying she had to go because Vanessa was upset about a guy who hadn't texted her back. My accomplishments were speed bumps in the conversation, brief obstacles before we could get back to what really mattered: Vanessa's life, Vanessa's problems, Vanessa's everything. I tried to tell myself it didn't bother me, that I was the mature one, the independent one who didn't need constant validation, but that was a lie I told myself to survive. The dinner that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. They decided to host this elaborate event at an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind of place with cloth napkins and waiters who describe every dish like it's a work of art. The guest list included my parents, obviously, my aunt and uncle, 2 family friends, Vanessa and her boyfriend of 3 months, and me. Except I wasn't exactly included in the way you'd think. When I arrived at the restaurant, fashionably on time because I actually respect punctuality, I noticed the main table was set for 9 people, and I counted 9 people in our party, including me. For a brief, beautiful moment, I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time I'd actually be treated like an adult member of the family instead of an afterthought. That hope died the second my mother noticed me approaching the table, and her face did this weird thing where she smiled, but her eyes looked panicked. She grabbed my arm with that grip that mother's perfect, the one that looks affectionate to outsiders but communicates "we need to talk right now" to their children. She guided me away from the main table with exaggerated cheerfulness and said, "Marcus, honey, we set up a special spot for you over here." And I swear to you, my stomach dropped before I even turned around. There, in the corner of the restaurant, near the hallway to the bathrooms, was a small table clearly meant for children, complete with a plastic tablecloth covered in dinosaurs and a booster seat that had been pushed aside. The table was so small my knees would barely fit under it, and it was positioned in a way that I'd be facing the wall while the rest of my family enjoyed their fancy dinner together. I stood there frozen, looking at this kids' table, then back at the main table, where Vanessa was already seated, laughing with her boyfriend and sipping champagne like she owned the place. My father was showing my uncle something on his phone, probably photos of Vanessa's latest vacation, while my aunt arranged flowers in a vase at the center of their elegantly set table. The contrast was so stark, so humiliating, that I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience, watching this happen to someone else, because surely this couldn't be my actual life. My mother was still holding my arm, still smiling that tight smile, and she leaned in to whisper, "Marcus, honey, we set up a special spot for you over here," and I swear to you, my stomach dropped before I even turned around. There, in the corner of the restaurant, near the hallway to the bathrooms, was a small table clearly meant for children, complete with a plastic tablecloth covered in dinosaurs and a booster seat that had been pushed aside. The table was so small my knees would barely fit under it, and it was positioned in a way that I'd be facing the wall while the rest of my family enjoyed their fancy dinner together. I stood there frozen, looking at this kids' table, then back at the main table, where Vanessa was already seated, laughing with her boyfriend and sipping champagne like she owned the place. My father was showing my uncle something on his phone, probably photos of Vanessa's latest vacation, while my aunt arranged flowers in a vase at the center of their elegantly set table. The contrast was so stark, so humiliating, that I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience, watching this happen to someone else, because surely this couldn't be my actual life. My mother was still holding my arm, still smiling that tight smile, and she leaned in to whisper, "Marcus, honey, we set up a special spot for you over here," and I swear to you, my stomach dropped before I even turned around. There, in the corner of the restaurant, near the hallway to the bathrooms, was a small table clearly meant for children, complete with a plastic tablecloth covered in dinosaurs and a booster seat that had been pushed aside. The table was so small my knees would barely fit under it, and it was positioned in a way that I'd be facing the wall while the rest of my family enjoyed their fancy dinner together. Important guests. Let that sink in for a moment. I wasn't an important guest at my own parents' anniversary dinner. Her boyfriend of 3 months, who couldn't remember my name half the time, was more important than their own son. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and I saw something I'd been avoiding my whole life. She genuinely didn't see anything wrong with this. This wasn't some elaborate test or a joke in poor taste. She actually thought it was perfectly reasonable to seat her adult son at a kid's table while everyone else enjoyed the celebration together. The worst part wasn't even the kids' table itself. It was the assumption that I would just go along with it, that I would once again swallow my dignity and pretend everything was fine because that's what I always did. I felt something shift inside me in that moment, like a switch flipping or a dam breaking, one of those metaphors that sounds dramatic but is the only way to describe what happened in my brain. All those years of being second best, all those moments of being overlooked and undervalued, all those times I told myself it was fine and I was being too sensitive, they all came rushing back at once. I looked at the kids' table with its stupid dinosaur tablecloth, then at my mother's expectant face, then back at the main table where my sister was holding court, completely oblivious to the humiliation happening 20 feet away. My hands started shaking, not with nervousness, but with a clarity I'd never felt before. A crystal clear understanding that if I sat down at that table, I would be telling my family that this treatment was acceptable. So, I did something I'd never done before in my entire life. I said no. Not yelling, not dramatic, just a calm, clear, "No, I'm not sitting there." My mother's smile faltered, and she did this nervous laugh thing she does when she's caught off guard. She said, "Marcus, don't make a scene. It's just for dinner. Don't be difficult about this." Using that tone that had worked on me for 27 years, that tone that made me feel guilty for having needs or boundaries. But something was different this time. I wasn't that kid anymore, desperately trying to earn scraps of approval from parents who would never see me the way they saw Vanessa. I pulled my arm out of her grip, gently but firmly, and I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I'm not sitting at a kid's table at 27 years old while my younger sister and her boyfriend get treated like royalty." The restaurant seemed to go quiet, though that might have been my perception because suddenly my father was standing up from the main table, walking over with that disappointed expression he reserved exclusively for me. He put his hand on my shoulder in what probably looked like a fatherly gesture, but felt like a warning, and he said in a low voice, "Son, your mother worked hard to organize this dinner. Don't ruin it with your ego." My ego? I was the one with the ego problem because I didn't want to sit at a table meant for toddlers? The absurdity of it hit me so hard I actually laughed. Not a happy laugh, but one of those laughs that comes out when you realize how ridiculous your situation is. I looked at my father and said something I'd been holding back my entire life. You're right, she did work hard. She worked hard to make sure Vanessa feels special while making sure I know exactly how little I matter to this family. His face went red and he started to say something, probably about respect and family values and how dare I speak to him that way, but I was already backing away from both of them. Vanessa had noticed the commotion by now and was standing up from the main table, looking confused and slightly annoyed that attention was being directed away from her for once in her life. My aunt was whispering to my uncle. Family friends were pretending to study their menus while clearly eavesdropping, and my mother looked like she might cry, though whether from embarrassment or genuine hurt I couldn't tell, and honestly didn't care anymore. I took one last look at that kids' table with its stupid dinosaur tablecloth, then at the main table with its white linens and fancy place settings, and I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and opened a rideshare app right there in the middle of the restaurant while my parents watched in horror. My father said, "What are you doing? Sit down. People are staring." And I replied, "Good. Let them stare. Let them see exactly how you treat your son." My mother reached for my arm again, but I stepped back, not aggressively, but with enough purpose that she got the message. I said, "I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. Not to dinners, not to holidays, not to family events where I'm treated like an inconvenience instead of a person." Vanessa finally spoke up, saying, "Oh my God, Marcus, it's just a table. Why are you being so dramatic?" And I looked at her, really looked at her, and I said something that still gives me chills when I think about it. "Vanessa, you've spent your whole life being the center of attention, so you genuinely don't understand what it feels like to be invisible in your own family." I said it calmly, without anger, just stating a fact, and I watched her face go through confusion, then irritation, then something that might have been the first glimpse of self-awareness she'd ever experienced. My mother started crying for real now, saying, "Marcus, please don't do this. We love you. We can fix this." But the thing about boundaries is that once you set them, you have to follow through or they mean nothing. My phone buzzed with the notification that my ride was 3 minutes away, and I said, "If you loved me the way you love Vanessa, I wouldn't be standing here explaining why being seated at a kid's table is humiliating." Then I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high while my entire family sat in stunned silence. The ride home was surreal because I kept expecting to feel guilty or to second-guess my decision, but instead I felt lighter than I had in years. I blocked my parents' numbers that night because I knew they'd start with the guilt trips and manipulation, the texts about how I was tearing the family apart and breaking their hearts. I blocked Vanessa too because I didn't need her performative messages about how she never realized things were bad. She knew. Everyone knew. They just didn't care because the current arrangement benefited her. My phone still buzzed with calls from my aunt and uncle, probably deployed as flying monkeys to talk sense into me, but I ignored those too, because I was done explaining myself to people who had watched me be treated like garbage for decades without saying a word. The next few weeks were intense, as my family tried every manipulation tactic in the book to get me to come back. My mother left voicemails crying about how she didn't mean to hurt me, and how could she do this to me during such an important time. My father sent emails about family loyalty and forgiveness, conveniently forgetting that loyalty works both ways, and I'd been loyal for 27 years while they consistently chose Vanessa. Vanessa herself sent a long text about how I was being selfish and ruining our parents' happiness over one small mistake, completely missing the point that it wasn't about one dinner, but about a lifetime of being treated as less than. I didn't respond to any of them because engaging would only give them ammunition to turn me into the villain of their story. What they didn't expect was that I would actually follow through and build a life without them. I started going to therapy to unpack all the damage from years of being the scapegoat and finally learned that what I experienced had a name: golden child syndrome, where one child gets all the glory while the other gets ignored or blamed. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected because I was always trying to make myself available for family events where I wasn't wanted anyway. I got a promotion at work because I finally had the mental energy to focus on my career instead of wondering why my parents didn't love me the same way they loved my sister. My life got objectively better in every measurable way once I removed the people who made me feel worthless. 6 months after the dinner, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, which was a violation of my boundaries, but also exactly the kind of thing she would do. She looked terrible, like she hadn't been sleeping well, and she immediately started crying and apologizing, saying she understood now how badly they'd treated me. She said Vanessa had been asking where I was at every family gathering and actually seemed upset that I wasn't there, as if my absence had finally made her realize I existed. My mother begged me to come to Christmas, promised things would be different, swore they'd treat me as an equal, used every emotional appeal she could think of. I listened to all of it, and then I said something that clearly shocked her. I appreciate the apology, but I don't trust that anything will actually change, and I'm not willing to put myself back in a situation where I'm disrespected. She looked at me like I'd slapped her, probably because she expected me to fold immediately, like I always had before. She said, "But we're family. You can't just cut us off forever over one mistake." And there it was again, the minimizing, the one mistake narrative, when it was actually decades of consistent behavior. I told her that family isn't just biology, it's about respect and love and treating each other with basic human dignity, none of which I received growing up. I told her that I'd built a life without them and I was happier than I'd ever been, that I didn't wake up every day feeling inadequate and invisible anymore. She left crying, and I closed the door feeling sad but also resolute, because sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. Christmas came and went without me, and I spent it with friends who actually valued my presence, laughing and drinking wine and feeling grateful for chosen family. My phone was quiet, except for one text from Vanessa saying, "Mom is devastated that you're not here," with no acknowledgement of her role in any of this. I didn't respond because I was too busy living my life to worry about managing the emotions of people who never worried about mine. New Year's passed, then my birthday, then Easter, and each holiday without them was easier than the last. The guilt I thought I'd feel never really materialized because every time I considered reaching out, I'd remember that kids' table and how small they tried to make me feel. About a year after I left, my aunt called from a number I hadn't blocked and actually apologized for not standing up for me all those years. She said she always thought it was wrong how they treated me, but didn't want to cause problems in the family, which is code for, "I prioritized keeping the peace over protecting you from abuse." I appreciated the apology, but told her that being a bystander to mistreatment makes you complicit in it, and that I needed distance from anyone who participated in that dynamic, even passively. She understood, or at least she said she did, and we haven't spoken since. It's lonely sometimes, not having a traditional family, but it's the kind of lonely that comes from making healthy choices, not the soul-crushing loneliness of being surrounded by people who make you feel invisible. The most unexpected part of this whole thing was how many people reached out to me after hearing what happened. Cousins I barely knew, old family friends, even some of Vanessa's friends who apparently always thought my parents' favoritism was messed up. One cousin told me she stopped going to family events too because watching how they treated me made her uncomfortable, and she was inspired by my boundary setting to establish her own. A former friend of Vanessa's messaged me to say she always felt bad for me and thought I deserved better, which was validating, but also frustrating because why didn't anyone say something when it mattered? Still, it helped to know I wasn't crazy, that other people saw what I saw and recognized it as wrong. These days, I'm in a serious relationship with someone who comes from a healthy family, and being around them has shown me just how dysfunctional my upbringing was. Her parents ask about my work and remember details from previous conversations and treat me like my presence matters, which was such a foreign experience at first that I didn't know how to handle it. I've had to unlearn a lot of defense mechanisms and people-pleasing behaviors that came from constantly trying to earn approval I was never going to get. Therapy has helped immensely, especially working through the grief of losing a family that I never really had in the first place. You can mourn the relationship you deserved, even if the actual relationship wasn't worth keeping. Sometimes I wonder if my parents have changed, or if they finally understand what they did wrong. But then I remember that understanding and change require accountability, which neither of them have ever been willing to take. My mother still sends occasional emails on birthdays saying she misses me, but they're always focused on her pain, her loss, how hard this is for her, with no acknowledgement of the decades she spent making me feel worthless. My father hasn't reached out at all, which tracks because apologizing would require admitting he was wrong, and his ego can't handle that. Vanessa posted something on social media recently about toxic family members who abandon you, without a shred of irony, still playing the victim in a situation where she was complicit in my mistreatment. The truth is, I don't miss them. Not really. I miss the idea of what they could have been, the parents who loved both their children equally, the sister who saw me as a person instead of competition or an afterthought. But those people never existed outside of my wishful thinking, and you can't have a relationship with a fantasy version of someone. What I have now is better. A chosen family who respects me, a partner who values me, friends who show up for me, and most importantly, self-respect and boundaries that I refuse to compromise on. I'm not angry anymore, which surprised me. I'm just indifferent, which is somehow more final than anger. If I could go back to that moment in the restaurant, standing in front of that kids' table, I wouldn't change a thing. Walking out was the best decision I ever made because it forced me to stop waiting for people to treat me better and start treating myself better. That dinner was supposed to be a celebration of my parents' marriage, but it became a celebration of my independence, my self-worth, and my refusal to accept less than I deserve. The kids' table was meant to put me in my place, but instead it showed me I had outgrown a family that tried to keep me small. So here's what I learned from being sat at the kids' table at 27. Your family doesn't get unlimited chances to hurt you just because you share DNA. Walking away from toxicity is strength, not weakness. And sometimes the best revenge is building a better life without the people who tried to diminish you. I don't know if my parents tell people their son abandoned them or if they've rewritten history to make themselves the victims, and honestly, I don't care, because their narrative doesn't change my reality. My reality is that I'm happier, healthier, and more whole than I ever was when I was trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. And if you're reading this or listening to this story and you see yourself in it, if you're the forgotten child, the scapegoat, the one who's always accommodating while being taken for granted, please know that you deserve better, and it's okay to walk away. It's okay to set boundaries, even if people call you selfish or dramatic or unforgiving. It's okay to choose yourself when everyone else has been choosing someone else over you for years. That kids' table moment was my rock bottom, and it became my launching pad to a life where I'm not just seen, but celebrated. Where my presence matters, where I'm not fighting for scraps of attention from people who should have loved me unconditionally all along. Walking out of that restaurant was the scariest thing I'd ever done, but staying would have slowly killed the person I was meant to become, and I'm grateful every single day that I chose me.